Habari Yasubuhi. Good morning. I guess we're still morning. So I want to also just take a moment to thank the organizers and the hosts of the Lake Victoria Challenge for inviting ICAO to participate. ICAO is incredibly enthusiastic about this initiative, and to be able to participate directly in helping progress and catalyze harmonization activities in this region and across the continent is something that's very exciting, and we hope to be able to continue to support you in this effort. Over here. Okay, so all of you have heard of ICAO, which is a specialized agency of the United Nations. Our member states are very familiar with their activities, but I'm going to bet that not everybody here has the same degree of familiarity. So a couple things about ICAO. ICAO has been around for almost 75 years, established in 1944 through the signing of the Convention on International Civil Aviation, also known as the Chicago Convention. This is an international treaty that addresses all aspects of civil aviation safety and is actually binding on 192 contracting states. In addition to the articles of the convention, we have annexes to the convention. It's actually quite helpful that Cliff went before me because he touched on some of those annexes and the standards that they contain, which become, with a level of 70% implementation, the aviation legislation and regulations that we find across the world. So ICAO, by virtue of its mandate, is the global facilitator for international harmonization and interoperability for aviation. And harmonization and interoperability are more and more important when we're speaking about an industry that is rapidly progressing, like the drone industry. So at ICAO, this is our typology of unmanned aircraft, and we deal primarily with two categories. Cliff mentioned the remotely piloted aircraft, which we were developing standards for. Those are RPAs that are capable of being integrated into non-segregated airspace. They fly international operations under instrument flight rules. And then we also more recently have been working on some guidance material for small drones, even small drones operating domestically. I just want to emphasize another point that Cliff concluded with, which is that unmanned aircraft are aircraft. So at ICAO, we try not to use the term drone too often, even though it's commonly used, because we try and hammer home the point that drones are actually aircraft. When you are flying a drone, you're actually flying an aircraft that has to comply with aviation legislation and regulations, which can be an onerous process, but it's in the best interest of aviation safety. So we have two approaches at ICAO to developing standards and guidance material for these two broad classes of unmanned aircraft. For RPAS, we adopt the full regulatory approach that we adopt for manned aviation. These are the aircraft that have to comply with rules that are essentially the same as manned aviation. We've been working on this for about 10 years. It can be a lengthy process, and there are certain standards that are still going to be adopted in the next 2 to 5 years. But the focus and the priority has been to develop standards for requirements to initiate international operations, so certificates of airworthiness, the RPAS operator certificate, and remote pilot license and training. Also working on standards for the command and control data link, the C2 link, detect and avoid capabilities, and safety management for RPAS. This is on the bottom right. You see the manual on RPAS. I hope all of you have been able to get your hands on that, but that was something that came out in 2015. We're in the process of updating that as the standards develop, as the standard making process develops. Okay, so for other UAS, and particularly small unmanned aircraft, we've had to adopt a more flexible approach to keep up with the demand for guidance. And in 2016, our assembly, so the 192 member states of ICAO, instructed the organization to begin work developing guidance to harmonize national regulations. So while we're not developing international standards for drones, the principles of aviation regulation and safety apply. So we will still be talking about airworthiness, still be talking about rules of the air, licensing and training of pilots, and safety management, but of course this will be scaled to the level of risk and operation. As Cliff mentioned, we adopt an operation-centric, risk-based approach. So instead of talking about certificates of airworthiness, we might be talking about something like a consumer product certification. Instead of separation standards, we talk about distance from structures, license versus operational limitations and conditions, and all of this taking into account the risk to third parties, recognizing that an 80,000 kilogram aircraft is different from a small drone of a couple kilograms or 10 or 25 kilograms. Here are some of the initiatives that we've undertaken for small drones since 2016, which actually Cliff was a big part of leading before he went to WFP. So we have established a UAS advisory group with representation from member states, international organizations, and also directly from industry to develop a toolkit that contains some of the tools that Cliff had in his slide, which you can see are being used effectively. So we're talking about authorization forms, things like that. So we have general guidance for national regulations, best practices and lessons learned from many states, practical examples, and you can find those on the ICAO UAS toolkit. If you just Google those words, you'll find it. Otherwise, we've been focusing on UTM. Harmonization, interoperability of UTM is going to be very important. As we see today, there are many concepts of UTM out there. There are many systems, there are many platforms, there are going to be service providers that plug into these different platforms, and a key element to ensuring aviation safety, but also the efficient growth of the UTM world will be interoperability. So we've been developing a framework for UTM that focuses on the core components of UTM. So that would mean registration, identification, tracking, communication systems, geofencing-like systems, and more recently, we've been looking at the UTM-ATM interface, how UTM is separate but complementary to ATM, and what might progressive integration of the two systems look like. So on that point, the first edition of the UTM framework will be out later this year, should be published on the ICAO website in December. So that is something to look forward to. These would be the core principles focusing on registration, identification, tracking, communications, and geofencing-like systems. Okay, leveraging UAS and humanitarian development activities while ensuring aviation safety. That's really what we're here to talk about. And ICAO is very excited about all the initiatives underway, and we really hope that we can participate and partner with you to continue to leverage the experience that is being cultivated in this room to develop international guidance material. And from mapping operations for emergency preparedness, disaster response, or even land surveys to drone delivery, which I think is the focus of our regulatory track later today, we're very enthusiastic about the benefits that unmanned aircraft can bring to communities, and we need to work together to make sure that this is done while maintaining levels of safety. And this is an interdisciplinary approach, so it's important that we identify all the different interfaces that these operations intersect with in the public health communities, the emergency response communities, and we bring them into the conversation. Because at the end of the day, safety goes hand in hand with economic development. Growth in this sector is going to depend on safe operations. Without one incident, one issue could derail this whole project, and we really hope that is not going to happen, and if we work together, I'm confident that it will not. Because, and then I'm going to show a slide here that you've probably seen in the last week. We could see some of the risks to manned aviation, but also public safety. This is the responsibility that civil aviation authorities have to ensure aviation safety and safety to the public. Okay, so before you get to your mission, you're transporting your drone by air to a mission site. What do you do with your lithium batteries? I had some conversations with people as we spent the better part of the day at the Dar es Salaam airport on Sunday about what you're doing. How do you transport your drones when you're going to a different mission site, whether it's by air in the same country or internationally? And I heard there are a lot of complications with that, but one is lithium batteries. What do I do about my drone's lithium batteries? So especially as the aviation community has come to a consensus that lithium batteries present a hazard to make it difficult to suppress or extinguish fires on board an aircraft and reduce time, which can reduce time for the safe landing at a diversion airport. So these are some of the hazards associated with lithium batteries. And the trick is, how do we manage these? Well, at ICAO we have some guidance. On this. So here it is. If your lithium batteries are contained in or packed with drones, they must be transported as cargo. I think we all know that because when we're traveling with laptops, we have to abide by these rules. You've got a 5 kilogram limit on passenger aircraft, that's per package, 35 kilogram limit on cargo aircraft, and if you're transporting batteries only, that's actually forbidden as cargo on passenger aircraft. What about drone delivery of blood, vaccines, and medical specimens? One of the speakers this morning alluded to some of the hazards associated with these types of operations. So Annex 19 at ICAO contains standards that are applicable to international civil aircraft operations, but they are recommended for domestic aircraft operations as well. Okay, so they contain, there's also technical instructions that provide for detailed provisions for the safe transport of infectious substances, biological products, including vaccines and medical specimens. And the issue is ensuring the viability of these products so that they can be used and fit for purpose on arrival, and that when things happen, for instance, if procedures are not followed or the drone crashes, then you have some mitigation plans in place and you make sure that you're not leading to the spread of disease rather than preventing disease. All this comes back to safety management, okay? So we identify the hazards associated with some of these operations, and states have a responsibility in Annex 19 to maintain a process to assess and manage safety risks. Okay, so these are some of the considerations that will come up in the course of safety management of your operations. This is an international framework that will be applicable to RPAS in the international context, but the principles are good to remember and do apply for domestic operations. And Annex 19 also requires operators, not just states, but requires operators to implement an SMS framework. I'll just show you what that framework looks like. We're not going to get into all the details, but you can see on the board three of the components that I've highlighted. Coordination of emergency response planning, that goes back to identifying all the interfaces of your operation and coordination that is required to ensure a safe outcome. Hazard identification, safety risk assessment and management. And I need to end, but I want to make a comment on prescriptive and performance-based regulations, because that's the topic of our session, and we'll be looking at that in more detail during our regulatory track. ICAO just had a conference in Chengdu, and we had a session during the RPAS 3 symposium entitled Performance-Based Regulations, Are States Ready? And we had 4 or 5 states from around the world share their perspectives. And there was a mixed outcome. So I wanted to share some of those lessons and then refer you to some guidance material that we have. So just as a recap, although I guess Harrison went into this yesterday, but prescriptive regulations are standards set for compliance. They're very straightforward. What to do, how to do, what to do it with. They can provide for certainty, which can actually facilitate a harmonized approach, which is beneficial. Some issues are or criticisms that they can be rigid, ill-adapted to the rapid pace of technological change. Performance-based regulations, they focus on an acceptable level of safety performance or acceptable threshold of safety performance and a means for verifying that the performance was met. They're flexible, encourage innovation, and a proactive approach to policymaking, which brings huge benefits to the drone industry. Some criticisms, they can be vague, they're hard to enforce, and they actually put a greater onus on regulators to collaborate with industry and develop focused guidance material to establish levels of safety performance and the means for ensuring that the performance was met. And often this is done on a case-by-case basis, which can complicate harmonization or even lead to lag times in regulatory approvals. So maybe this might not be such a satisfying conclusion, but a hybrid approach is recommended, okay? And of course, the devil is in the details because the difficulty is identifying which components work best with a prescriptive model and which components work best with a performance model. And I think it's only through collaboration with regulators and industry that we can determine that balance. And I invite you to just check out the manual in RPAS, and especially the safety management manual, which goes into some of the discussions on performance-based regulations. So final thoughts. Unmanned industry is evolving at an unprecedented pace, especially in this area. And unmanned aviation brings challenges, unforeseen challenges to the traditional aviation regulatory system. Harmonized performance-based regulations can support the growth of innovation in the industry. Regular information exchange between ICAO, states, and industry is necessary throughout this process. And the humanitarian benefits of these operations will be dependent on a safe, effective, and harmonized regulatory framework. And I would just encourage you to continue to work together, continue to keep ICAO in the loop so we can progress these harmonization activities together. Thank you very much.